Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, Ethan Manifest Dread Sachs. Ethan, I've got a little dread about the amount of takes we're gonna have to walk back this episode.
It's not that many takes. It's just like one big take that then has some ripple implications, right? I guess two. Two big takes that have some ripple
Yeah, we said
implications.
the scale was tilted this way, and the teeter-totter is flipped like the complete other direction. We were pretty wrong about format predictions, I think.
That's fair. Yeah, which
It's
is
really
kind
hard to
of
predict, so who cares?
format's hard to predict. That's fine. And like whatever, we're trying stuff out, which is interesting because I feel like our reflection on the changes for the crash course is largely positive. I think our experience of doing a different grading scale, trying to mess around with like focusing on some different stuff. I think we had some positive takes on that. Our listeners, the feedback that we got was largely positive about trying something new out, but I'm not sure if it led to the best predictions that we've ever
But it was
had.
good content. Who cares about being right? It's great
Exactly.
content, baby. It's all about
Good.
the content.
That's what we're here for. I thought you were going to introduce me as one of the property brothers.
I don't know that reference. I'm sorry.
You don't know any? Do you know? You have no idea who they are?
Can we not publicly shame me in the podcast? No, I don't know who the
No, I mean,
Property Brothers are.
I'm sure you're not alone. They're not like they just have like a million home renovation shows and spin-offs, like that sort of thing. Like if you're in any of that kind of reality, like flip a house space, the gimmick is that one of them is like a real estate agent and the other one is a construction worker. And so like one of them like helps you put it on the market or whatever, and the other one like does the renovations.
Oh, so like I bring all the content of the podcast and you market it here. You sell it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, like that. Exactly like that.
I'm sure I've seen it in the dentist's office, but I do not turn that channel on voluntarily in my own home.
That's fair, and I think you're like I said. I don't think you're alone. I think you need not feel any shame. So yeah, we're just gonna dive in, talk a lot as much as we can about I think we'll check in on the crash course from last week, a little some takeaways. But then we got a chance to do what half a dozen drafts each for early access. I did an at home pre release with some friends last night, so played a little sealed, got to mess around in that space. So we're just gonna sort of get as much information from those like few drafts as we can and check in on some over and underperformers and big picture stuff. And as you said, we've got some things to walk back. But first things first, let's chat about the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. But we would highly recommend that you do so because we've got some great perks over at the Patreon page. Access to the Lords of Limited Discord, access to the episode early, ad-free, access to a private section of our Discord. And we're going to be announcing some new perks in the coming weeks as well. So excited about that and excited to welcome our new patrons to the fold this week in Mike, Mitchell, Killian, Sam, Thor, Matosh, Tobin, Connor, Will, and Derek. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. We've got one of the Avengers in the Lords of Limited Patreon now. We're going to be unstoppable.
That's right, Thor. Yeah, very good. I was like, which one is that?
A little slow on the uptake there, friend.
Oh, sorry. It's not. That's my. You don't know about the Property Brothers. I don't really know about the Avengers. That's one of us has a dark spot in their pop culture references. Okay. Anything you want to chat about from the crash course last week, from our changes? Now that we've had a week to reflect on what we did.
I think it was fun. I think it was fun for us, and I think as a
Mm-hmm.
result, it was more fun for our listeners because I think previously, initially, I don't think it did. Initially, I think we were trying to do something different than LR, which we
Mm-hmm.
accomplished, like a shorter, more digestible version that was packed with as much information as possible, stats, like that was the goal. And then that spawned all of the 17 lands data stuff. And as a result, I think we've been largely outdone, which as we should be by people
Yeah.
who are actually good at data. And it just, the last year or so plus, it just kind of felt like we were doing it to do it and just
Yes.
reading stats at the listeners, which is not fun for us, probably nor fun for a bulk of our audience. So I think just trying to shift it towards conversation, and maybe we'll have to adjust things going forward. Like I think we spent a lot of time on the gold uncommons, and maybe my
Mm-hmm.
take about the gold uncommons doesn't pan out for formats, and we keep tweaking. But I think trying to keep it conversational and big picture for the listener is where we should be headed.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I saw you have a point here about should we be talking about rares? And that is something that I feel like people bring up. Someone always brings up at least once per crash course. Like it'd be nice for you guys to touch on rares. Where are you at? What? Because I have some thoughts, but I want to hear what your thoughts are about talking about rares in the crash course.
I mean, I brought that up to me this time. Like, I
Oh,
felt
okay.
once I started drafting, this was not spawned by listeners. I felt once I was drafting, I was like, oh, there are a lot of really good rooms rares. And I think those
Mm,
juice up the rooms archetype. And we're going to get to rooms being an overperformer. But I think with play boosters, maybe this also needs to be a shift that we include rares somehow. Because the rares almost feel equal in terms of the commons in some sets to the shape of the format, and they dictate where your drafts start so often, and they're
mm,
the most important cards in your deck. And not that everything revolves around them or anything like that, but maybe that there's a way to have a segment on, like, keep an eye out for these rares juicing up these archetypes, or like these are the best of the best. And again, that'd be hard to know without playing them. Like, I played with a card that was 1 and a white 2/2 survival, and if it connects, you either get
hmm
a give it flying, put a +1/+1 counter, or put a lifelink on it. Like, I probably would have given that card, I don't know, a B minus, the traditional, like, pulls me into a color grade without giving it much thought, or a B. And that card's like an A. It's just really, really good and snowballs away with the game.
hmm
I'm sure it's going to be one of the top rares on 17 lands. So I think just trying to figure out a way to get some rares in the conversation is something I would like to do.
I have two feelings. One is just sort of a personal cap. Like I feel like we're trying the amount of stuff we're trying to do. The full set drops on Friday. We record on Sunday. The amount of time amount of stuff you're trying to do in that amount of time feels like we're kind of capped in terms of prepping for the crash course, grading all the cards, just making sure our show is we're set to record. So I feel like adding rares into the mix feels overwhelming personally. But I also feel like most rares, and maybe you disagree, but most rares, it's clear to me, are they better or worse than, or at least, prior to playing with them. I would have a pretty clear, like, yeah, this is better or worse than the top uncommons or commons. But it might be interesting if each of us come to the crash course with some rares, like, got question marks about these. Like, can we talk about some that seem like they might be good, they might be bad? I don't know. Those would be the ones that I would be interested in talking about.
Yeah, not necessarily in terms of grading so much, but like having read them prior to recording. Like, I just have never even looked at the rares or mythics
Yeah.
prior to recording, and maybe reading through them and just seeing, so that you have a broader frame of reference. Because if we're trying to make format predictions, we're trying to make format predictions without a third of the picture then. If you're not
Yeah.
looking at the rares and the mythics, which feels wrong, that feels like putting a blindfold on arbitrarily. And I agree, there is a time crunch, so maybe we can't always do it, or we'll
hmm
see. But I would like to try to work that in somehow next time and test it out and see, and not necessarily dedicate a huge portion of the show to it, but a little 5-minute segment or something.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think good shout. Let's incorporate some rares into the crash course next time in some capacity. All right, get on your shoes because we got some stuff to walk back.
Holy cow, do we have some stuff to walk back? Okay, so I think we were wrong about most of our assumptions in the crash course. And I think, like, a Teeter-Totter is a good example. We were really high on Manifest Destiny and really
Dread,
low on Rooms.
dread, manifest dread.
Dang it. We were really we were
It's right
we
there.
were
It's right there for you. It's written in the Google Doc.
but
It's right
I'm
there.
working on my teeter-totter. I'm looking in the camera to make sure I got my teeter-totter angles right.
Yeah. Okay.
The important stuff.
hmm
We were really high on Manifest Dread, and I think low on Rooms, and the teeter-totter swung the other direction to where we're high on Rooms and lower on Manifest Dread. And not that Manifest Dread is the worst thing in the world, but just that it is not. I thought it was a slam dunk, couldn't miss mechanic, like that you had to do nothing and it would be great. And it turns out there's some deck building considerations and other things like that that go along with Manifest Dread. And I think being wrong about which way the teeter totter was facing led to a lot of other, you know, logical fallacies.
So I'm going to take each of these misses piece by piece and start with Manifest Dread. Because for folks who maybe haven't played, maybe I'm sure some percentage of our listeners didn't watch early access, didn't go to a pre-release. They're just waiting to play when it comes online this week. So why did we miss on Manifest Dread? And for me, the thing is that it's not just intrinsically powerful. Like it is synergistically powerful when you care about the graveyard, when you care about delirium, because then you can sort of do some, I'm getting my, when I cast Manifest Dread, I'm getting a sorcery in the bin, and then I can bin a land or whatever else, and I have that choice. But then there is also like you kind of have specific creatures. I think you have a shout about the land cyclers a little later on, but it's good to talk about them now that like the land cyclers are largely, yeah, just big clunky creatures. But in manifest dread decks, you probably do want to play one or two of those so that you have an option to just, secretly have a giant 5/7 or 7/6 trampler under this manifested creature, or the whatever. If you happen to be in a deck where you're playing that white, the two and a white 4/3 double strike that enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it. If you manifest that, you just get to, for 3 mana, flip it up as a 4/3 double strike, that sort of thing. And so there is a little bit more. It's not just, oh, manifest dread's going to be great. You do kind of have to either put it in the right home, which is delirium in my mind, or I guess be blue green manifest dread with the payoffs, or you're thinking about the kinds of creatures that might be best to hide under there and then flip up.
Yeah, and I think you're probably going to hear us and other content creators come down on Manifest Dread, would be my guess, but not to say that it's bad. I think it is just worse than we thought. And a lot of the other stuff that does work works easier. So figuring out how to build Manifest Dread decks optimally is going to be, I think, a big piece of the puzzle. And I would expect its stock to go up as people get better at building those types of decks. But also, to your land cycler point, I think I'm at the point right now where I would want to play something like 15 lands, 3 land cyclers, 15 lands, 4 land cyclers. Like you want to get, I think, big things to flip into in Manifest
Hmm.
Dread. I
Yeah.
think the other thing that sticks out to me about it is it's less broadly synergistic. Like, yeah, it does the delirium thing, but really the delirium decks want to get delirium quick. And you,
Yeah.
you can get delirium quick in the format, and Manifest Dread does not help you do it that quickly. So I think,
Right.
yes, there's some overlap there, but not a ton. And I think it is just pretty focused. I think it is blue green manifest dread, which hurts it a little bit. And it also is reliant on several cheap creatures that if they die and you're flipping a bunch of tutus, like manifest dread feels great when you've got the bookworm or you've got paranormal analyst, which are the cards that just let you basically draw cards. But every time you
Mhm.
manifest dread, you get the 2/2 plus draw another card. And then
Mhm.
you just bury the opponent in card advantage. But if your opponent has Scorching Dragonfire for your Paranormal Analyst, and then all of a sudden you're just manifesting tutus, your deck is doing stone nothing. And it feels pretty bad. So it's a bit of a glass cannon that way, but the glass cannon isn't even killing your opponent. The glass cannon is drawing a bunch of cards.
Yeah, I faced my first few matches. I faced some really good blue green decks, and I didn't have the timely interaction, and so I came away from those early uh, match experiences being like, "Yep, Manifest Red is still as busted." But when I was playing it, and those things did get answered, or I was playing it and realized, "Oh, I actually haven't built my deck correctly. Like, I don't have the big things to flip up. I'm not doing it." Like, you are a little bit in no man's land with just a bunch of tutus that get outclassed by a lot of different axes in the format.
Well, and then even if you do build your deck right, there's kind of the reanimator thing in Vintage Cube where you're trying to assemble 3 pieces, right? You're trying to
Mm,
assemble either Bookworm, Paranormal Analyst, or the 3 green enchantment that lets you get a basic every time you manifest dread.
mhm.
You're trying to assemble that plus the cards that say Manifest Dread, which oftentimes aren't creatures, and then you're trying to flip into a creature. And the flipping into a creature part, even if you build your deck well, is still a random chance. Like you could build your deck great, include the
Right.
land cyclers, and then you still have a chance of whiffing when you
Mhm.
do the Manifest Dread.
Okay, so on the other end of the teeter-totter is Rooms, which is
Yeah, we
great.
were
It's not clunky, it's just great.
no, we were way too low on rooms. So I think rooms are just good cards, which is something
Or
I missed
Or
on.
the ones that are good cards are excellent cards, right? Like,
Yes, that is
because
true.
there are a handful of them, and it's most of them are great, I would say, in my experience so far. And there's a handful of them that are just kind of duds. Like I don't know the name of it. The black one that's like 2 and a black, draw 2, lose 2, and then the other half is if you attack alone, the creature gets +1/+0 and death touch. Like that one I think doesn't matter, but like a lot of them do matter. And the thing is that you just get like good effect for usually good rate, and then massive mana sink that is also going to be good effect, good rate somewhere down the line.
For example, there's one that's 2 and a blue, put 2 stun counters on something, and then 3 blue, draw 3 cards, discard a card. That card is really strong. It just locks a creature down for a couple turns, and then your opponent at some point, if the game goes long, can draw 3, which is a very deflating feeling. And the other thing that they all do, I think, which we kind of gave them credit for, but maybe not, is they all trigger Eerie. Like,
Yeah.
so I think Rooms being good cards makes Eerie a lot better. And I think we thought Rooms were not going to be good cards, and therefore we were down on Eerie. So Eerie stock goes way up along with Rooms stock going way up. And there are clunkers, certainly in blue and red, especially at the common rarity. But the good ones are very good. And you don't even have to be the Rooms deck to
Right.
want the good ones because they're just cards with kicker, but you don't have to pay the kicker cost at the same time. It's like kicker in installments. You play a good card, and then while you play your good card, you also draw a good card to play at some later point in the game. Like, for example, that blue one, a good way to think about the card evaluation is 3 mana, put you stun counters on something. Would you play that magic card? No. But if that magic card said 3 mana, put you stun counters on something, draw a magic card that says 5 mana, draw 3, discard a card, yes, you would play that card every single time, right?
They're like learn lesson from Strixhaven in that sense. That like I mean, you're not getting your choice of lessons that you can get to go grab, but you are drawing that card. And the fact that that you don't have to do it in that order, like oftentimes you will, but the fact that sometimes you get to be 5 mana, draw three first, and then I'll do the stun thing later when I need to, or vice versa. Like, I thought a lot of the times, because I think the one Glassworks, which is the 2 in a red deal 4 to a thing, and then the other half of it is a 5 mana room that says at the beginning of your end step you deal damage to an opponent. I was like, well, clearly what you're doing with that one is you're using it as a removal spell, and then maybe later you unlock the other room, which is true. But a lot of the rooms don't actually aren't binary in that sense. Like they really, you can do one or the other. A lot of the times you might be like, oh, I'll actually do this one first and then maybe get the other thing later.
Yeah, and in addition to all that learn lesson stuff going on, there's also synergy from the enchantment
Right.
entering the battlefield and the doors getting unlocked. There's just so much value packed into one card, and so that has several ripple effects for the format. I mentioned Eerie stocks going up, but also the Rooms deck wins the late game so hard. Like if you're green black mid range or green black delirium or whatever, and you're against the Rooms deck and you didn't kill them by turn 7 or 8, you're just gonna get buried in late game value. And that also then pushes the format towards the opposite ends of the spectrum. Like you either want to be aggressive to get underneath the Rims deck, or you want to be a Rim deck playing the late game, being able to stop the aggro decks. But being in the middle is a really tough spot to be, I think, because of the existence of the Rims deck and how much value the Rims provide.
Right. If your opponent plays a room that where both halves are good or impactful, and you're not pressuring them, it feel like if it happens on turn 4 and you're not pressuring them effectively, it does feel like the game is over. In like that you have this like sinking feeling of like, I'm about to be buried in card advantage if I don't end the game, and I'm not ending the game, and I don't have my own room, so I'm probably going to lose. But I'm going to lose in like 7 turns.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing we were wrong on is that the aggro decks are good. I think this format's
Yeah.
going to be really cool because it's got and the mid-range decks are good decks too. I think it's got a very wide variety of archetypes and strategies, and I really like formats where there's the push-pull tension of a good late game deck and good aggro decks. And
Mhm.
I like being on the good late game side of that equation, but just that matchup and can the late game decks survive and turn the corner and then win? That's the kind of magic I like to play. So I'm excited for gameplay in this format quite a bit.
So what are the mid-range offenders in your mind?
Survival, I think, is a big one. I think survival you were lower on than me coming into the format. After playing with it, I'm pretty down on survival. It was you said it was billed as green white mid range, and that
Uh-huh.
has how it's felt to me. I've only played it once. I did 6 or 7 drafts. I think I played Magic for 8 hours on Wednesday, which was a lot after the school day. So
You
I tried
were you were had your own delirium going on in your own head at the end of that stream.
I was delirious at the end of that stream. But I think when I was green white survival, there aren't a lot of good 2 drops with survival, and rightfully so, because it would snowball too
Uh-huh.
much, I think. But then once you get to the 3 drops, you do have to do some work enabling attacks, and if you ever can't enable attacks, it's not good.
And if you're on
But
the
it's also
draw, it's a lot harder to get that deck to pop off.
yes, definitely a lot harder on the draw for sure. And then if you don't win quickly, you just know you're losing to rooms. Like
Yeah.
once your deck has stalled, it's a very sinking feeling to try to get to the late game. It's just it's not a good aggro deck, and it's not a good late game deck. And it actually honestly it's not a particularly good deck. Period. I don't think. I have gotten stomped by versions of it. If you've got the rares and the uncommons, there's just not tons of support at common for it.
It also feels a bit like I mean, a lot of the like A plus B decks, I think, feel like you have to draw them in the right order. Another reason why I think we talk about Reanimator while I'm down on that deck. But I agree. So like, as I just want to say, like, I think Black Green Delirium is a mid range deck, and I think I still think it's good. It's probably not the best deck in the format, like we thought it was last week, or like I thought it was last week, but I still think it's a very good deck.
I think I was there with you. I think that would have been my format prediction, but I certainly would have it behind red white, which we had in 10th place. I think or
Ninth,
something. I
yeah,
think red white has shot up to number one or number two,
yeah.
um, and I think I would have black green behind blue red as well. But we'll get into all the archetype power rankings.
Any other big picture things you want to talk about before we do chat about some archetypes?
Yeah, a couple things. I think talking about that format tension of aggro versus control. I think it once people start to figure out that those are the two best things, and I certainly think rooms are going to get a little bit worse once they're contested, and you can't get the blue red room that is Smoky Lounge that adds red red to spend on rooms. That card is incredible in the rooms decks because it's just so much mana production, and the rooms have so many places to put their mana.
And it should be clear that Room's deck can be blue red, but it's also very likely to be soup.
Yes,
Like
for sure. Five color rooms is
5 color rooms
very
is
strong.
real. Yeah.
And then you'll also just play the good rooms in whatever
In
deck also.
exactly.
But I think as people start to figure out, push towards those poles of the format, then that might have a chance for the more focused stuff to shine. Like then maybe blue green manifest dread stocks rise, maybe black white reanimators stocks rise as some of those decks that go together a little easier and more obviously powerful at the opposite ends of the spectrum. I think there's going to be room for the format to evolve that way. And then the last thought is just about the rares. There's some really, really, really good rares. Like if you look at our 17 lands tier list, the rares and mythics are at the top, and there's some strong ones, but there's also the tools to combat them. So I don't feel too badly about most of the rares. There is one that's absolutely ridiculous,
Oh
Valgavost
yeah.
Onslaught. It's green XX sorcery. You manifest red X times, then put X +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So at 3 mana, you get a 3/3 manifested dread. At 5 mana, you get two 4/4s
Hmm.
manifested dread. And at 7 mana, you get three 5/5s
Hmm.
manifested dread that then maybe you hit creatures and can flip up into monstrously large creatures. That card is egregiously powerful.
It's
As
got like
only a single green pip in a format where you can definitely splash
yeah.
and you can get to the late game. Like the late game is relevant in this format, and I think in that aggro versus late game matchup, I think the late game decks have the tools to get there. Like
Hmm.
I think you can stop the aggro decks and make it to the late game if you want to.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's
Well,
close, but I think the late game decks are maybe slightly favored at the moment going into it, and we'll have to see. And
you're just
certainly as aggro,
biased.
huh?
You're just biased. You just
Yeah,
want the
maybe.
late game decks to be
Yeah,
favored.
maybe.
Let's talk about some of the color pairs specifically. Now, like we've got some big picture of like what mid range and aggro and control decks are doing, but where do the color pairs fall into those categories? And I think black white for me is a big mover down. It's not a like for a couple reasons. One, the point you have here is that it doesn't have overlap really with other archetypes, right? It's just sort of doing its thing on its own. And I also think like you have to draw the right parts of your deck, right? In the right order. You have to if you're going to get your, it's like Reanimator is hard to do in Vintage Cube and there's like seeded cheap stuff there. There's stuff to do it in this format for sure. And I will say one of the benefits, or at least maybe it's because people are scared of the deck or not interested in it, but like you get the Shroud Stompers like last pick. Like no other deck wants those like big fatty boom booms, and you can get land cyclers or whatever, and the reanimate spells. Those are all going late, but I think partially because the deck is it's a little clunky. You got to draw all the right pieces, and then even once you do, ooh, here's my Shroud Stomper on turn 5. Like you can beat that. The Rooms deck can beat that.
Oh, for sure. That's the other reason is there's some great removal in the format. So you can
Yeah.
do all this work to reanimate, some large fatty boom boom, and then your opponent can answer your card with a single blue mana. Like
Hmm.
that feels pretty terrible as the reanimator deck. And I think it is not a tier one archetype, not close to a tier one archetype. I think certainly towards the bottom of the archetypes. And then the
Yeah.
fact that it also doesn't have overlap is just tough to get into. Like you're
Yeah.
just not incentivized to try to get into it. It would be like okay, I'm being forced to draft Reanimator in this seat just because I'm seeing none of the other cards that go in the good decks.
Hmm.
So I'm also pretty low on black white. Blue white, on the other hand, has been very impressive. It seems like a super strong tempo aggro deck.
Yes.
Erie's good. It gets to play the good rooms. There's a lot of synergy that can pop off in the blue white decks. I would have that very high up on the list of aggro decks.
Yeah. And I think like, we were really high on, was it Gremlin Tamer, the white blue 2/2 that has Eerie make a 1/1. It's also crazy that the Eerie triggers are not once per turn. That like I had a friend in the at home pre-release I did last night. He had the rare, the 2/3 with flash that has Eerie. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/3 with flash that has Eerie draw card. And so he flashed that in at the end of turn 3, and then on turn 4, he drew 3 additional cards because he played like cheap room, cheap room, cheap room. Like ridiculous. And then you're just looking at like, well, those I got to kill this thing now because there's 3 other rooms that are going to get unlocked
Right. Well,
on
you
that
are
board.
you drew three additional cards and then also drew the
Or
second
3.
half of all three of those rooms. Like it's just
Yeah.
rooms are holy cow. Rooms are good.
But yes, I think Eerie Tempo is a really good deck. And I also think blue white, because it gets to play in the Eerie room space, tempo aggro is probably what it does best, but I definitely think you'll see blue white control decks in the format as well.
Yeah, they just get to play great cards.
Yeah.
Green white we already talked about a little bit. I think both of us are lower on it than we were after the crash course. It's pretty mid-rangey, and I think it doesn't have lots of good survivor cards at common and uncommon in the 2-drop slot, which is what you would really want, I think, to have it fit well into the format. So I think that's an archetype to try to steer away from. I would put that in the bottom tier, I think.
And blue red rooms, we can't sing rooms praises enough. That is why, Ben, that's why we're called the Property Brothers. Do you get
I
that?
put that part together. I
Okay.
got that part.
There we go. I do want to talk about blue black. So this is billed as Eerie Control. I had a chance to draft this once. Did you play this deck yet?
I have not played it yet, no.
So my feeling with it was that I didn't have any oomph to win the late game. I had the tools to get there, and then once I got there, I had nothing to do. And so I felt like you probably need rares, you probably need bombs to be happy with this deck. I feel like I don't know if the tools are there at common or uncommon. Maybe the like was it Vile Manifester or whatever, the 7-drop in black that edicts them, but like not necessarily super expensive stuff. But I just felt like I was like, oh, okay, I can like set up this early game really well, and then I don't know what I'm doing once I get to the mid to late game.
Right, I played this matchup once where it was blue-black control and I was playing rooms, and I just felt like I could not lose because my
Yeah.
deck just went so hard in the late game compared to their deck. But I do think like Grixis rooms is a really cool space that you might be able to play in and pick
Uh
up the
huh.
eerie stuff from blue and black and the room
Yeah.
stuff from red. I do think it's in danger of just losing to better late game decks, but also it could be like if you get the good rooms cards, you could be that deck.
I also think you might like there might be, and I don't know if black actually has the juice to add to this, but you might want to think about not drafting it as Eerie Control, but can you also draft blue black as Eerie Tempo?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know because like its signposts don't really help you out with that as a 2 mana 1/4 and a 3 mana 2/2, but like it's possible.
Blue Green Manifest Red. We talked about it a lot already, but to talk a little bit more specifically about it, those uncommons, Oblivious Bookworm, which is blue green for a 2/3 at the beginning of your end step, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless a permanent entered the battlefield face down under your control this turn, or you turned a permanent face up this turn. That card's insane. Paranormal Analyst also. That's the 1 in a blue 1/3. Whenever you manifest Dread, put a card you put into your graveyard this way into your hand. So you essentially get both cards that you manifested Dread for. If those die, your deck falls flat. We talked about that already. But the other thing that I kind of realized after playing the deck is Oblivious Bookworm is just great. And you don't need to go so hard on Manifest Dread. Like you can just put that in a good deck that's, maybe two other colors touching blue or green and splash a bookworm, and maybe you've got a few manifest dread things. It's just a very good card that you should try to play. Threats around every corner, which is the enchantment I mentioned earlier. It's 3 green. When it ETBs, you manifest dread, and whenever a face down permanent enters, you search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. That's really important because you want to be able to be flipping the creatures that you do hit, and
Right.
oftentimes
So
those are going to be expensive.
when it takes the lands out of your deck, so you're more likely to then be able to manifest into actual bodies instead of lands.
Yeah. The other thing though that's awkward about this deck, which is another reason it's a mover down, is I think at its core, this is a late game deck, and it's worse than Rooms in the
Yeah.
late game. Like, and you get to play some of the Rooms. And I do think there's some overlap. Teamer was a very
Mhm.
impressive 3-color wedge in the early access thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good shout. We also got to talk about red white as a huge mover up for both of us. I actually got a message from someone who was testing for worlds, and they were like, "It's interesting that we've already like done some practice drafts, and like red white has trophied like 6 out of 9 times." And I was like, "Oh, oh, that seems like a big miss for us." And it has panned out. I had in my sealed pool. My sealed pool in my at home pre release was really rough. I opened Marina Vendril. That's the Wooburg rare, the like 3/5. I saw that train wreck slash save a draft of yours in early access. But this is it's Wooburg for a 3/5, and you reveal the top 7 cards of your library when it enters, and you put all enchantment cards from among them into your hand, and then you can tap it to lock or unlock a door of a room you control at sorcery speed. And I really wanted to try and make that work. Played it, sleeved it up, played it for one game against my friend's like excellent blue white deck, and I was like, I got to do something else, and so I switched into a not exciting red white deck, but it stole some games. Red white has so many ways to push damage and randomly close out the game. I won games out of nowhere when my opponent was at 10 life, 15 life, just like, oops, sorry. The deck is really good.
The stupid +3/+0 trick, and then if it dies, you manifest dread or whatever. That card is obnoxious. I lost to multiple of those being cast in the same turn a couple times during early access.
Well, and it's on my list of overperformers, but jump scare, the single white instant creature gets +2/+2, gains flying, and becomes a horror enchantment in addition to its other types. I cast that, I think, exclusively at sorcery speed, just to be like, oh, do you have any flyers or reach creatures? No? Okay, here's 7 surprise damage in the air, and I'm going to tap my thing and make this thing unblockable. And yeah, it's just the deck has a lot of ways to just be like, oops, sorry.
That's certainly, I think, going to be the front runner for best of one, darling, best
Oh,
archetype in
yeah.
the format.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
The other card we should shout out while talking about red white is the MVS, the
Ah,
most
yes.
valuable Slayer.
Yes,
three
this
three
is
and a red for the 2/4, and at the beginning of combat, you can give a creature +1/+0 and first strike, or I guess an attacking creature. So it can do it to itself, but also the turn you play it, you get to give something else +1/+0 and first strike and push damage.
mhm.
That card is the real deal for red decks that want to push damage.
Yeah, you called I mean, again, another Strixhaven shout, but you called it Combat Professor, and I think
Yeah.
that's right. That was the 2/3 flyer that gave something. Was it just +1/+0, and or was it 2/3 Vigi? I forget, but it did the same thing. Like enabled attacks the turn it came in, so it could target itself, obviously. But the fact that it does it when it comes in is pretty big game, and that one of the things that a lot of the cards, maybe one of the reasons I think I missed on it is I felt like all of the like power 2 or less stuff seemed, I don't know, like more cute than good. That it was like, okay, that's what you're doing. Like it's like, well, that's what we're doing. And so look at all this stuff. And I was like, I don't really think these like small creatures are, but there's so many ways to then cheat through, right? That you're like, well, it's power 2, but now it's +1/+0 and first strike, or now it's +1/+0 and indestructible, or yeah, I get to use my what is ragged doll to make my thing that's power 2 or less unblockable, and then I'm gonna go a +1/+0 and a +1 and a trick and a whatever, and then like so you really can make those hits a lot bigger than just 2 damage.
Well, and I think one of the things that we missed about it that's kind of obvious in hindsight is that you have to play a bunch of 2 drops with 2 power in your aggro decks. So you're getting rewarded
Mhm.
for what a good aggro deck already wants to do slash has to do, which is boosting it up in power level quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there are some really good 2 drops at uncommon, and the uncommons are just more prevalent now, and so the deck is pretty strong.
Green black, I still think very good. Just probably not the best archetype, right? Probably it might still be in the where is it? Yeah, it's still in your tier one of your three
I have it sneaking
tiers.
in tier 1, but at the bottom of tier 1, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Where are you at on green red?
I played green red, played against it. It's finicky. I don't like it. The uncommons just aren't good enough. The red green 3/2 haster that then like gets 4/3 and trample if you have delirium. There's just not enough of a payoff, and you have to do enough work to get delirium. There's enough cards that randomly hose the graveyard that it's awkward. It's just a much worse aggro deck than both red white and blue white. Is how I
I
feel about it. It is the worst of the aggro decks.
I had an insane start in early access. Turn one, Patchwork Beastie.
Mm-hmm.
That's the single green 3/3 artifact creature that mills in your upkeep if you want, and then can't attack or block unless you have delirium. Turn one Beastie. I believe turn two Beastie, and then turn three I hit delirium on the Beastie mills.
Okay.
I almost lost that game.
Yeah.
And I just like can't really think of a better start for that kind of a deck. So I think I'm with you that like it's so tough because I'm like, well, Delirium, I don't love the aggro version. And I guess I like the mid-range version better. I like green black better or Jund Delirium better. But again, I think it needs some juice. You just rooms is just got to be thinking about rooms the whole time. Like does my deck have rooms? No. How am I beating decks that have rooms?
And if the answer to your question is does my deck have rooms? No. Your deck better be very fast
Yeah.
and very good at closing out the game.
And even still, it probably should have a couple rooms because
A
those are
couple
good
rooms and a
cards.
couple of the good rooms, yeah.
And then lastly is red black. I did have a chance to play with this. I did they only have live drafts for the first half of early access, and then I did a bot draft of it on Thursday morning and got to play out a few games with the deck, and it felt pretty darn good. I do think you want to build it with again an aggressive bend. I think the danger with red black sacrifice aristocrat decks is you're like, well, I can grind into the mid to late game, and like sure you can if you have to,
Not against rooms.
but the thing is that because red black is sacrifice a creature or enchantment,
Right, you do get the rooms.
you want rooms, and there are a couple cards that I think are kind of overperformers in red black specifically that we'll talk about when we get to those lists of cards. But I think red black is still good, not tier one, but I'd put it in tier. I like it in tier two where you have it.
Yeah, so if we get into the archetype power rankings, and I feel pretty good about these tiers for, whatever, playing Magic for a day. Tier 1, I think red white and blue white as the two premium aggro decks there. Blue red rooms slash 5-color room soup, like blue
Mm-hmm.
red denoting rooms dominance, and then green black sneaking in at the very end of tier 1. Could see it being tier 1, tier 1.5, whatever. And then tier 2, red black, blue green, blue black. And then, it's all fine-ish mid-range decks, red black probably being the fastest of those. And then tier 3 being green red as a not desirable aggro deck, green white as a pretty undesirable mid-range deck, and then black white as just what we talked about. All those pitfalls of, it's really tough to get the reanimator stuff to come together, doesn't play well with other archetypes, etc.
And
And
so
I
a
think
pretty wild reversal. Talking about a teeter-totter, pretty wild reversal in the color power rankings here.
Yeah, and I think that's because we were wrong about which mechanics mattered and which types of cards mattered. So it's almost inverse. So we've got red in number 1. Like red stocks have gone way up with rooms going up because red gets to play in both spaces. Like if you start red, you can start towards the aggro train,
Uh
you can
huh.
start towards the room train. Like it all of the red archetypes are pretty good. Red white and blue red are both in tier 1, red black in tier 2. Like red green is probably the only thing to really avoid. And I could even see red black bumping up into tier 1. I just don't have enough experience with it yet, but I
Mm-hmm.
would feel very good about starting drafts as red at this point because I think you get to go in a bunch of different powerful directions.
Yep.
And then blue in number 2, blue also felt super impressive. Blue white being a good aggro deck and then also touching into the room space and getting to play in the late game as manifest red pays out. Blue green, could be a good archetype as well once we figure out how to build it a little bit better and that sort of thing. So I do like the blue decks quite a bit. and then white in third. And I could see blue and white being flip flopped. I've got blue ahead of white. I'm sure other people are going to have white ahead of blue.
Hmm.
But white, again, being the best aggressive color in the format, I think like purely aggressive. If you're white, I would want to be aiming for red, white, and blue, red. Get the game done quick. If you're starting white, you should be, because white gets to touch rooms, but the rooms it gets to touch are pretty aggressive. Like they
Yeah.
they help you get the game over with.
Hmm.
And then green, white, and black, white, I'd be trying to steer away from if you started white. And then green, which we had in number one, has moved down to number four, and black, which we had in number two, has moved all the way down to last place.
Yeah. Let's chat about some over and underperformers. First up on this list is acrobatic cheerleader. This is one in a white for a 2/2, and it has survival. Put a flying counter on it. This ability triggers only once. Can't get multiple flying counters. The thing about this that's sneaky is like you look at it and you're like, it's a green white survival card. It's like, no, this is just great in your red white aggro and your blue white tempo decks.
Yeah, this is the best aggressive two drop at common in a set where there aren't lots of good aggressive two drops at common.
Hmm. Yep.
This is Gust Walker, assuming you can get it through once or whatever.
That's a pretty good comp. Yeah, I like that.
Next is Unable to Scream. This is blue for the enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities. And is a toy artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/2 in addition to its other types. As long as enchanted creature's face down, it can't be turned face up. If you want to get to the late game, Unable to Scream is incredible. Like in the blue red Rims decks, Unable to Scream is so, so, so powerful because you win if you get to the late game, and this just helps you get there.
Also, blue white Eerie Tempo loves this card as a way to double spell and get a creature like out of the skies or whatever.
Yeah, and get +1/+1 counters from your
Yeah.
things that trigger when enchantments, ETB. Yeah, for sure.
Next up is a good aggressive room here. Grand Entryway and Elegant Rotunda. Grand Entryway is one in a white. Make a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature token. And Elegant Rotunda is two in a white. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to two target creatures. The fact that Grand Entryway double triggers Eerie for 2 mana, right? So it's coming in as an enchantment and then it's making a glimmer token as well. It really pops off in blue white.
Yeah, the card is scary in blue white. It goes hard with Optimistic Scavenger, which is another. This card looked good to us. I think it is even better than it looked. It's white for a 1/1, and whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So if Optimistic Scavenger into Grand Entryway into unlocking Elegant Rotunda, like it's a
Oof.
very powerful start.
Yep.
We talked about the land cyclers a bit already. We expected these to be nothing, and I still don't think they are great, but I do think the blue and green ones stock have gone up quite a bit, and I do think you actively want copies of those in Manifest Destiny decks.
Quarter in the
Manifest
story.
Dread. I even typed Manifest Destiny in the show notes. Oh no.
It's too deep. It's just the worm is deep in there. Next up we have Meat Locker and Drowned Diner. This is the room we talked about. The two in a blue, tap a thing, put two stun counters on it, and Drowned Diner is 3 blue blue, draw 3, discard a card. I mean, this card it's just really good. Now, really good in the you're more interested in this in like blue red rooms control than you are in blue white Eerie Tempo, right?
But you'll still play it there. Like you're always playing this card in Blue Eyed Eerie. This card, I think, is the card that has moved up the most for me out of every
Hmm.
card. Like I would have thought this card was D level, just didn't matter or whatever. And I think this is a premium common now. Like if we're talking about 10 commons that matter, like this would be on my list of commons that matter, and it would be towards the top of the list, I think.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. That's really good. Really good to know.
The rim stocks are just going up. This is just a great card on its own. It's got enchantment synergy,
Hmm.
wins the late game for you. Like I think this is better than Glimmer Burst, which is very weird for me to wrap my head around. So Glimmer Burst is a 3 and a blue instant, draw 2 cards, make a Glimmer enchantment token. I think this just does everything that Glimmer Burst wants to do way better and is more flexible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I was like, is it possible that Glimmer Burst is better in blue white Eerie Tempo? But I don't know. Like, pretty interested in lock a thing down for a couple turns in
Yeah,
Eerie
you
Tempo.
want that half more, and then you also get the card advantage. Glimmer Burst is
Yeah.
just small ball compared to this.
Yeah.
And creatures with two types, and other things that have overperformed. Like I'm not super high on Delirium, but if you are Delirium, you really want cards that are artifact creature or enchantment creature, which is like fairly obvious, but getting one of those to trade and then only needing to get instant sorcery in the yard or flipping one of those when you manifest dread and having it be two types in one card. That's a big piece of the puzzle to getting Delirium to go quickly.
For example, like I don't think this card is still filler. Grasping Longneck, 2 and a green, 4/2 reach. When it dies, you gain 2 life. But it's an enchantment creature. And like you do kind of want to make room for it. It's like filler plus in Delirium decks.
Right, because your opponent can't ignore it. They do have to trade with it, or they're going to be taking
Right.
4 a turn. So once you cast it, it's almost always going to the graveyard the next turn if you want it to.
Yeah. Speaking of, there's Fear of Lost Teeth, which is the single black 1/1 enchantment creature. When it dies, deals a damage to any target and you gain a life. This card looked great going in, and I think is great. It's great on defense too if you want to get to the late game and care about Delirium.
I think it's not offense at all. Like I think this card is only I need to get to the late game and survive the aggro decks, and I think it is very strong there.
I think it's extremely strong in red black specifically. Like I do think it maybe not a high pick there, but like it's really good sack fodder there, and it's 2 types. Because sometimes you have a little Delirium stuff happening in your red black deck.
It's red,
eh,
black, blue, black only, I think, right?
right, yeah, blue black was the other deck I was going to shout out.
Yeah. Next up, we've got Glassworks and Shattered Yard. This is a 3 mana deal 4 room on one half, and then Shattered Yard is 5 mana unlock, deal a damage to each opponent on your end step. This is the saver of the format. It's just a synergistic removal spell, and that is so strong.
Yep, I love this card. Talked about Most Valuable Slayer already. Next up is Rampaging Soul Rager, 2 and a red, 1/4 spirit. Gets +3/+0 as long as there are 2 or more unlocked doors among rooms you control. Yep, rooms are great. Like I think we were like, not excited about this card, but really excited about rooms, and as a result, this card is really good.
Yeah, and I don't think a high pick. That's
No.
one of the beautiful things about it is that you can get it on the wheel. But if you do and you have enough rooms, card is very strong because it
Mhm.
like the 4 toughness, but also is that hits that number of like can reliably block a lot of stuff in the format and doesn't die to lightning strike and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Next up, we've got Glimmerlight. This is 2 mana for an equipment. When it enters, you make a 1/1 Glimmer enchantment creature token, and it can equip for 1, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1. There was a little bit of scuttle about in the Lords of Limited Discord, you picking this over Glimmerburst a couple times when you were
Mm,
blue-white, and I came to your defense.
thank
I think
you.
there are not lots of good 2-drops in this format. Like, red-white gets a lot of them at uncommon, but at common, it's tough to find good 2s that want to attack, and Glimmerlight is one of those. Like, it's exactly what you want in blue-white Eerie Tempo because it gives you the Eerie trigger while also helping you push damage on your other creatures. And maybe this is more of a 3-drop than a 2-drop, but it's just a tight, efficient little package that is, I think, very good in the format.
Yeah, I think this card is. I still feel pretty good about my take on this being golden eggy. Like, I think this is like, yes, it's at its best in blue white Eerie Tempo, but I think it has a lot of applications in the format. Next up is Sheltered by Ghosts. 1 and a white for an aura. Enchant creature you control. When Sheltered by Ghosts enters, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. And enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. I didn't put this on this list.
You did not. I put point for you, point for Ethan. Yeah, it. I guess you did. It's an overperformer for Ben, not an
I mean,
overperformer for Ethan.
it has. I would put it in. I said I could push this up to A minus. I would at this point. This card is. It has been backbreaking, and I've faced this a lot more than I've had the pleasure of playing it. And I did feel. I did feel scared when I had it in my deck and had it in my hand. Of like, oh, am I gonna go? Which do I put it on? I don't want to get blown out. Like timing it does feel important, but I gotta say, like Ward 2 on this feels like costs so much. Like by the time you have 5 mana to play Glassworks or whatever to kill the thing through the ward, it's too late.
Yeah, the thing there's several things going on that I agree timing it is hard, but like if you stick the landing, you're winning the Olympics. Like it is
Yes.
very difficult when you hit with it to overcome. And the other thing that's tough playing against it, I have not cast it yet, but it forces you like you completely dictate how your opponent has to spend like the next 2 to 3 turns of the game trying to deal with this thing. And the
Mhm.
ward is so awkward. It's very good.
Yeah, the
And
card is
and oftentimes what you said, by the time they answer it, the damage has already been done.
right.
Next up, we've got Split Skin Doll. This is just a great 2-drop in white aggro decks that want to be aggressive. It's the 1 and a white artifact creature. It's 2/1. When it ETBs, you draw a card, then discard, unless you control another creature power 2 or less, but you often do. So this is often just get a creature on the board, cantrip, everything the white decks want to do.
Next in blue is Bottomless Pool and Locker Room. This is the single blue bounce spell in Bottomless Pool. And then Locker Room says whenever one or more creature you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. And that costs 4 and a blue to cast or unlock.
I think the thing that was unclear to me about this card is that if this were only Bottomless Pool, it would be good in this format. Like especially in blue-white tempo decks. 1 mana, trigger Eerie, bounce a thing is everything that deck is interested in, and that's a good deck. And then Locker Room being tacked on there is just gravy. Sometimes you're going to do that.
Yeah. So are you feeling like this is basically a blue, white, secret, gold card? Or are you playing this in your. Because I feel like it's a little like. If I'm thinking about like the Room's control deck, I'm not really interested in Locker Room in that deck because at that point I'm just winning, right?
No, but you're very interested in Bottomless Pool because you can afford to spend single blue and a card to give yourself more time. Time is the only thing that deck needs, and this buys time for you.
And it being a room, potentially 2 rooms, is synergistic as well.
Yes.
Okay, that's fair.
Next up is Fear of Being Hunted. This card has been a huge mover up for me. This is 1 red for an uncommon 4/2 haste, must be blocked if able. It's randomly insane, right? If your opponent like has a 1/3 back or an 0/4 back, like when this is 3 mana Flame Tongue Kavu, which we should shout out because we keep getting questions about this. 3 and a red for a 4/2 ETB deal 4. That's what FTK is. If you ever hear FTK or Flame Tongue Kavu.
Yeah, Flame Tongue Kavu is just shorthand for creature that kills a creature.
Yes. Fear Being Hunted is randomly great that way and absolutely broken with it into the curve of Most Valuable Slayer, because then you have a 5/2 first strike must be blocked. You just put your opponent in the abyss, which is also another Magic card. Should look that up.
That's a good shot. I have not seen that card yet, but I did see you. Right, I should say not seen it in my own games. I saw you have it on stream, and you were really high on it. So I'm happy to hear why. Let's talk about Rootwise Survivor. We got some pushback on where this was in our tier list. 3 green for a 3/4 haste, and its survival says you get to put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental. Where are you at with this? Because I faced it once, and it's snowbally. It's hard to deal with, but it is a small body. Like, where are you at?
It's got some Amber vibes for me. Like I was low on it as a card until I played against it, and if it has an uncontested attack, which because it has haste, it's not easy to do, but it's definitely doable. I mean, certainly it's atrocious if you're behind, but you should be wanting to close the game out if you have this card in your deck, and it does close the game out in a hurry. It connecting plus making another free 3/3, two 3 powered things for 5 mana, one of them having haste is pretty strong, I think.
Yep. Yeah, that was my, again, small sample size for both of us so far, but like it sounds like we both came to the same conclusion as like this card is actually pretty annoying to see.
Next up, we've got Greenhouse and Rickety Gazebo. So Greenhouse is a 2 and a green room that gives lands you control, tap, add 1 mana of any color. This is also an uncommon. This feels kind of rare to me, but it's just an uncommon. Rickety Gazebo, 3 and a green. When you unlock this door, mill 4 cards and return up to 2 permanent cards from among them to your hand. This is a really good build around. I wouldn't have had this, I don't think, in build around territory, mostly because I wrote off rooms, but this is one of the best things you can have if you are doing 5-color room soup.
What's also really good in the turbo self mill stack your deck style, which is also real. I did that in early access.
Is it good?
I can't say for sure if it's good or not, but it can happen.
That sounds like it is not good. I think the thing you have to be aware of if you're doing the Greenhouse Rickety Gazebo thing, you have to be able to count for doing nothing on turn 3. Like the thing that Smoky
Turn
Lounge
4.
does.
You're
Well,
never,
turn 3.
you're never.
Sometimes.
I feel like this is a like 90-10, where like Rickety Gazebo is the card I'm casting first almost always.
Not if you're using, like if you have a couple copies of this that you're using to enable your multicolor mana base or something. Like once you get 3 of these or whatever, you kind of turn on a 5-color mana base pretty reliably. I don't know.
All right.
I guess that's for splashes. Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
But this and or Smoky Lounge to a certain extent, you do need to like do something on turn 2. Like in the Rooms deck, if you do nothing and then play a room on turn 3 that doesn't affect the battlefield, you're dying most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's also awkward if you're like, well, my turn 2 play is a removal spell and you're on the play. Because then you might
Yes.
not be able to do that, and then you're like, "Uh-oh, signing up to do nothing on turn 3 and 4, then I'll Scorching Dragon Fire you on turn 5." It's like, no, no, no. I don't think that's what you wanna do. You gotta,
Yeah.
actually affect the board on your side.
Next up, we've got Arabella, Abandoned Doll. This is red white for a 1/3. This is the red white signpost uncommon. Whenever it attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. I think when I looked at this, I thought, how often is this going to have attacks? And the answer is often enough. Plus, your opponent has to run into combat tricks that you have. Plus, maybe you get in one attack early, and then later in the game, you have 5 creatures with power 2 or less, and it's a lava axe that gains you 5 life also. It just makes it impossible to race as well. It puts your opponent in so many tough positions.
There are so many ways to sneak this through also. Sneak it through, buff it, whatever, that aren't just like, "Oh, I have to use a combat trick," etcetera, and that's also not accounting for the times where this might just have an attack.
Right. So, like, I think would have had this at B minus or something. Like, this is much closer to B plus,
But
A minus type things.
that's also about how good red white is in general.
Correct. But if we're trying to put labels
Yes.
on how valuable the gold cards are, Arabella is one that is much more valuable. Should you be willing to first pick Arabella? Like, absolutely. You should
Yes.
not be scared of taking an Arabella and trying to go hard after the best deck or one of the best decks in the format.
We talked about jump scare. I put cracked skull on this list because this was one we argued about in the crash course. This is 2 and a black enchantment. When it enters, look at target player's hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. And then when enchanted creature is dealt damage, destroy it. So I have this as an overperformer for me because I thought this wasn't going to matter. And I have been impressed by this in 2 spots, red, black, and blue, black. So in red, black as something plus an enchantment that's hanging around for you to sacrifice. I think these are all points you made. And then in blue black, in conjunction with Fear of Lost Teeth. Because like blue black Eerie control really wants Fear of Lost Teeth to be on the defensive. And Fear of Lost Teeth plus Cracked Skull is excellent because you're just like, oh, now you can't ever attack me on the ground because my Fear of Lost Teeth will chump and then kill the thing that Cracked Skull is on.
Yeah, whatever your best creature was when you cast Cracked Skull. It was really annoying when it was cast against me. I don't
Yeah.
have much experience, but I groaned when my opponent cast it against my late game Rooms deck.
Yeah. Another card I have is Sporogenic Infection, 1 and a black enchant creature. When Sporogenic Infection enters, target player sacrifices a creature other than enchanted creature. When enchanted creature is dealt damage, destroy it. So I thought this looked atrocious. Have you seen this in play yet?
I didn't think this looked atrocious. I thought this card looked good.
So one thing that I missed is that if your opponent has 1 creature in play, you can cast this on your own creature and it will edict them.
Okay.
And so that's just a play pattern that wasn't intuitive to me. That happened to me in early access, and I was like, oh, you can do that. Great. Which you might be like, well, so then it's like an edict with setup. But if you're a deck that, again, cares about that rectangle being on the battlefield as an enchantment for you to sacrifice or pick up again or whatever, that's upside. And then it just like, there's often enough times where like there's 2 creatures in play, and this is really annoying because it edicts their best thing.
Creature and then nerfs the other one. Yeah, this card is
Exactly.
strong. I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
cards very good. I already talked about Ragged Doll a little bit. This is the 1 in a red 2/2, or sorry, Ragged Playmate, 1 in a red 2/2 artifact creature. Pay 1 tap, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. This just really helps push damage because there's so many ways for you to do that and then pump the thing, or this sneaks in an Arabella, whatever. This card's just good.
Yeah. And
Um,
lastly, we've got Brood Spinner on the list. This is a black green for the 2/3 with reach. When ETBs, you surveil 2, and then you can pay 4 black green, tap it, sack it to make a number of 1/1 flying insect creatures equal to your delirium count.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this card was great, and it is like it's every bit as excellent, if not a little bit more. Like this again, I'm happy to first pick this card and have this as a reason to go into black green. Like the fact that you can sack this at instant speed, that you get to go like chump, sack. Here's 5/1/1 flyers that are going to win me the game. Really powerful.
Yes. Takes us on to the Underperformers. Baelmerk Leech is up first. This is one in a black 2/2 Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, each opponent loses 1 life. Not that I thought this card was good, but just to shout out the type of card that is absolutely atrocious in this format, which is like a 2/2 in a non-aggro deck that doesn't help you really get to the late game in any way.
And
Like
doesn't help
black.
you win the early game,
Yes,
really.
it just does nothing. But there are a lot of cards like this that are blanks if you're not really cognizant of how you're building your deck. Like this looks like a fine card to put in a black deck, like for 2 mana, like blue black Eerie or something. This is you are putting a mulligan in your deck if you put this in your blue black Eerie deck. Like, it is so easy to ignore a card that is a 2 mana 2/2.
Yeah. Speaking of cards to ignore, I think Fanatic of the Harrowing is there. 3 in a black, 2/2. When it enters, each player discards a card. If you discarded a card this way, draw a card. I just think you were right about this body is too small.
Yeah, it's just not been good. The 2/2 is not relevant. It's you'll play it in Reanimator maybe, but Reanimator's not good. Like this is just
Right.
not a good card.
I agree.
Manifest Dread up next, 1 and a green for a sorcery, and it lets you manifest Dread. I think there's going to be a series of green cards here in a row for me that have moved down, partially as a result of green moving down as a color, but green has also moved down as a color because these cards are worse than I thought they were. The mechanics are worse than I thought they were. This is fine, but it doesn't pull you into green by any stretch.
Yeah, I agree.
You'll play it in black green to try to help get your delirium count up. You'll play it in blue green. You'll play it in red green. Like it's fine everywhere. You won't play it in green white, but it's just not good enough to be a pull into green.
I think that the issue with a lot of these green cards is it's feeling a little like not Neon Dynasty because green was really good there, but that like I don't think green's commons should be a pull into green for you. Like if we were to do our list of 10 commons that matter
It'd be
now,
a lot. It'd be a lot of just guy colored cards now. I think.
there would not be green cards on that list.
So say its name up next, another fine card. It's just not enough to pull you into green. And then the other thing that's awkward about all these manifest dread decks is you end up playing a bunch of sorceries, and then if you play a bunch of sorceries, you hit a bunch of sorceries when you manifest dread. It's
Mm,
really hard to dial the knobs to get all that right. And I do think you can. It's just going to take a while to figure it out.
to get delirium, you mean?
Yeah, well, to get delirium or to get the right sorcery creature
Uh-huh,
ratio, because
uh-huh.
like presumably you would want manifest dread and say its name in the same deck to try to get delirium. But then when you cast the manifest dread and you hit say its
Yeah.
name, like there's just a chain reaction of like all these knobs to dial into exactly the right amounts.
That the better decks don't have to do.
Correct. And Spineseeker Centipede up next is 2 and a green for 2/1. When each beast, search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. If you have Delirium, it turns into a 3/3 Vigilance. This is a very good card. Like I'm not by any stretch saying that this is a bad card. I just again like I thought this was going to pull you into green, and I don't think it should. It's a little bit small ball for the format. I think it has the patient naturalist problem from OTJ, where like, yes, it's a 2 for 1. Yes, it draws you a land. I think you will value it highly if you are green and need to splash. But just like drawing a land 2/1 body, your opponents can largely just ignore this body.
Well, one of the awkward things is that, and I don't even know if I feel like this is an underperformer because I have felt it has a similar feeling to me as some rooms do. Like if you're not pressuring your opponent and they play a spine seeker centipede, you're like, that stinks. Like you're just like curving out, you're doing your thing, you're not gonna be stumbling at all. And maybe I am or whatever. Um, so it's still good, but the awkward thing about it is that it is competing exactly in the space of was it locker room, the 2 and a green room that goes and finds a basic and then has 5 in a green, manifest dread, put 3 counters on it. Like if you're doing a late game room splashing thing, you want that over centipede like every
Ooh, that's a
time.
good point. That hadn't quite clicked for me yet. That card's probably just better than Spineseeker Centipede, huh?
Yeah. And so like I agree with you. This is still a very good card, but it is a little bit homeless kind of in
Yeah,
the
and
format.
I think as a result, just it shouldn't pull you into green. Very good.
Yes.
You should take it. You should always play it. You should never cut it if you're green. It's just not. It's just not good enough to make green great or to form any green decks or anything like that.
Well, I don't even know if that's true. Like I don't think you play this in green red and green white. Do you?
No,
In
probably not. Yeah,
right? So, like, that's
and then
another
you just want
awkward
the Rim
thing.
card in the green blue and the green black decks, huh?
Yeah. So again, you'll play this, like, it's in those decks, you're probably never cutting it, but, like, if you have the choice, and if you have 2 of those other ones, like, you don't need this as much, etcetera, so
And like all of those cards going down is a big reason that the green stock has gone down.
mhm, yeah.
Orphans of the Wheat is another one. This is 1 and a white for a 2/1. Whenever it attacks, you can tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature tapped this way. This is still a pretty good card. It's just not a pull into white. And I think if you are relying on this in green white survival, it trades way too easily. Like it's a one-shot survival trigger, but that's not good enough to go after aggressively. Like I thought this was going to be one of the top uncommons in the set, and I think it is nowhere close to that.
I agree with that. I will say, again, we're all working with small sample sizes, but I had this in my red white sealed deck and was really impressed by it. Again, in the space of one, it just like there's surprise damage, right? The fact that you get to tap things that you cast that turn for it, but also the fact that with that stupid ragged playmate, you can make it unblockable as a 2/1, then it attacks,
Oh,
tap 3 things down, now you're
oh.
chunking in for 5.
Okay, you're kind of selling me. You're kind of selling me. Maybe I'm too low on it.
I don't think it's a pull into white, but I think it's a good card.
Fear of Failed Tests is up next. This is 4 and a blue for a 2/7, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards. This is just kind of a big, clunky creature without an ETB, and I'm out on those at the moment. The format felt very Cons of Tarkir esque to me in a way. Like that once you get to a matchup that is two late game decks, tempo and efficiency matters a lot, or being able to double spell matters a lot. Getting ahead on mana, getting a mana advantage. Like it is not hard to get card advantage in the late game decks. It is hard to get mana advantage, and this doesn't really do that for you. So I think this is just also again kind of homeless.
Yeah, I felt that a lot. Like, if you were ever trying to cast this to air quote stabilize, it felt bad because you were like, well, this is probably going to die to something that costs 2 mana, and then they'll get to do something else. And if you're ahead or at parity, you want something different anyway. So, like, yeah, this card is just not great. Another expensive card. It's interesting. I was like patting myself on the back for grading a lot of expensive cards highly last week, and I'm not thrilled about that choice. Uh, Miasma Demon, 4 black black for a 5/4 flyer. When it enters, you can discard any number of cards. When you do, up to that many target creatures each get -2/-2 until end of turn. The thing is that you just don't have that many cards in your hand when you finally land this thing.
Yeah, we were way too high on this. Like I think we both of us graded this like A- or something, or B+, A-.
Yeah.
This is a C
What
at best, C+.
what about the black 7 drop as well? That when it enters, like, you have to sack a thing, but then they sack a non-token enchantment and a creature.
That one's the real deal, I think. I don't know that it's insane, but it's certainly a good card. Way better than Miasma Demon. I don't think they're very comparable. And I
Mhm.
am interested in the 7/1 in Reanimator, and it does give black decks that like black green, for example, some punch in the late game against the Rims deck.
A card I'm not that high on, or at least like this feels like more build around than just intrinsically good, is Defiled Crypt Cadaver Lab. Defiled Crypt is 3 and a black. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, make a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then Cadaver Lab is single black. When you unlock this door, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I think on its own, I'm not interested in this. Like, I think you want to make sure you can do this. Like, I had this in conjunction with there's a rare it's a single mana artifact, Vacuum, that can
The
tap
Ghost
to
Vacuum.
yeah, can tap to exile a card from a graveyard. So the fact that you can do this, and Defiled Crypt says just cards, it doesn't have to be creature cards. So the fact that Defiled Crypt plus Ghost Vacuum then lets you make a 2/2 every turn, great. You're playing a black green deck and you've got Say Its Names, and Say Its Names are pulling cards out of your graveyard after you mill 3. That's triggering Defiled Crypt. Great. You're doing some work. You've got some engine stuff, whatever. On its own, I'm not interested in this because you also can't. One of the things I thought, I was like, well, you can always you could just do the raise dead part. But if you do the raise dead part first,
Then you don't get
then
the trigger from
then
the
you
other
don't get the
half.
trigger
Yep.
for Defiled Crypt. And if your deck isn't doing the engine thing with it, then you're just playing raise dead in your deck. And that's not a good
Well,
card in 2024.
And even the engine thing just isn't good enough. Like
Right.
I had the engine thing going, and I just lost to blue red rooms that played the mythic rare that like doubled all your triggered abilities,
Yep.
and just got absolutely savaged.
Yep. Yeah. Like a stream of tutus doesn't win the late game. That's the thing.
Yes,
Like it's fun to do, but it doesn't win.
right.
And the last card I'm pretty down on is Altenac, the thrice called, the 5 green 9/9 trample that has the synergy with Say Its Name. And this is all, it's all, ripple effects of we're lower on green, we're lower on Say Its Name. So, and I'm just also lower on like, this is the
Big clunky
same
creature.
big clunky creatures. And like, I thought that, okay, you could do the Say Its Name thing, but sure, I'll just cast a 7 mana 9/9 trample. Plus, it's got the synergy of the 1 and a green discard. It can ramp if I've milled stuff, but like, whatever. Like this just isn't a pull. This is a C plus. This just doesn't make me want to draft green.
Yep, I agree. A few other cards to touch in on. Innocuous Rat, the 1 and a black 1/1. When it dies, you manifest dread. Is that just too small ball for the format? Is it good? Is it homeless? Any
No,
thoughts?
my guess is its home is red black exactly.
Okay. Winner's Intervention, 1 and a black for an instant, deals 2 damage to target creature. You gain 2 life. I haven't seen it, but it seems pretty narrow. And a lot of the good cards that are early that you want to kill have 3 toughness. Like Arabella has 3 toughness. Oblivious Bookworm has 3 toughness. Like the premium cards that are 2 drops that you want to kill, this doesn't kill.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I have played with this card and was extremely unhappy with it. I'm out on Winner's Intervention. I like my take of wanting to give it a 0 last week, and I would like to give it a 0 this week.
Noted. Done. Impossible Inferno, 4 and a red for an instant, deals 6 damage to target creature, and if you have Delirium, you exile the top card of your library. You can play it until the end of your next turn. Is this good? Better than we thought? Pull you into red? Certainly not that, right?
Certainly doesn't pull you into red. I played it in red green. It was good. Chained them together. Impossible Inferno revealed an Impossible Inferno. That felt pretty sick.
Ooh,
Like,
nice.
but yeah, you'll know. I think it's basically in exactly one deck. Maybe you play it in like I don't. Red white's not playing this, right?
Probably not.
Probably not playing this. I guess, but you can
You
like
could at the
you're
top of
gonna
your
have
curve or
you're gonna have
whatever.
artifact creatures in that deck. Like you could get there, but I guess how are you getting lands in the bin? I don't know. Like I think this is basically a red green or Jund card, and you'll know when you want it.
Okay. Next up, Ethereal Armor. This is single white. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control and has first strike. Is this insane? Like I haven't seen it yet, but through the lens that I'm viewing the format, Ethereal Armor just seems broken in blue white.
Yeah, but you want a protection spell for it, don't you? Or you just think like the fact that it's so cheap and so impactful means that even if they answer it the next turn, you probably already did some damage.
Maybe, yeah, like that this is a good enough aura that it gets past the downside of
Yeah, I mean,
auras. You're also gonna get an eerie trigger for 1 mana when
all
you
that
play it.
glitters was like kind of good in Eldraine. And I cared about that was like the same thing, right? Didn't give first strike, but cared about artifacts and enchantments. Yeah, I could see it. I'm on my eyes are open to it if I'm in blue white. But that's the only deck for it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um
lastly, here we've got the Peed.
yeah.
Anthropede. 3 and a green for a 3/4 with reach. When energy, you may discard a card or pay 2. When you do, destroy target room. Flame Tongue Kavu. Said it in the crash course. Is this better than we thought if rooms are good?
I think it has to be. I think this has to be better than we thought. Like because I also think this body is I think if you're trying to compete, if you're like maybe it's just a black green delirium card, but if you're trying at all to not to get to the late game and compete with the rooms deck, I think you want this because those decks also want ways to not die to flyers.
Yeah, I think this card has got a home in the format. I think it's going to be an overperformer.
I think so too. I think so too. I'm excited. I lost a lot during early access, and
And you're
I
still
I'm
excited?
still excited to play this format. It seems really deep to me so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's going to be a lot to figure out, and I think the decks that are good are going to be fun to play against each other. Like the room mirror when one of the rooms decks is clearly better than the other. Not the most enjoyable experience in the world.
Yeah.
But like the rims versus the aggro mirror is very exciting. The aggro mirrors are very exciting. I think there's just a lot of different directions to go in the drafts as well. I'm also high on the format, and I think it's pretty cool that everything's been flipped on its head from the crash course. I'm into that. Um, my plan is to start in the Jeskai space and to try to either beat down or do some rims shenanigans.
Yeah, I like your shout about why you think red is one or number one in the power rankings, because it plays in both of those spaces so well, and it has so much intrinsic synergy and cards that, like, you're playing Glassworks in your aggro decks too. You know,
Right.
like,
Yeah. It's just a great card everywhere and is insane if you can make double use out of it.
and I think then can also still, if you end up having to go off in a red green delirium space or red black sacrifice space, a lot of those cards are playing well there too.
Yes. All right. Great place to wrap us up. Best of luck as we start the format this week on Arena. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
You can find all of our content on our website at lordsoflimited.com. We've got a tier list up there. First pass. Maybe it'll have a second pass by the time you get over there. We've also
It'll be
got our,
updated for sure.
yeah, updated for sure. He says, we got our merch courtesy of T Public. We've got our Patreon tiers if you want to check those out. We've got our episode backlog, links to our YouTube channel and our Twitch streams, all of that at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. We've got a lot of great perks over at the Patreon page. We're going to have even better perks coming your way in just a few weeks. But for now,
The best perks.
we've got the best perks.
Anywhere in the whole U.S. Sorry, that was terrible, Donald Trump.
It's bad. Also, is that what I sound like right now? I gotta stop.
Maybe think of it when you went. Maybe think of it when you went even bigger.
They'll be coming. They're going to be best. They're going to be huge. You're not going to know what's coming. They're great. Some people are saying they're the best. I don't know. I'm not doing any of that. Okay.
Please keep that in.
Can't be done.
Great place to wrap us up. Go forth, conquer. What is this format called? Duskmourn. Strong ending.
Manifest destiny. Go forth, the Louisiana Purchase. Westward ho.
Please stop. I'm trying to pull it together here.